rental market has been around for only 10 years, and it has quickly created the dichotomy between rental and ownership. Our first panel of the day is Can Rental Go Mainstream?, which will be moderated by Brian Eshelman of Alex Partners. Together with panelists from John Donahue of Castle and Jeff Fowler from Farfetch, they'll be discussing what this means for retail.
Before we start, why don't we, just because this is such a new segment in the industry, maybe just give 30 seconds on your backgrounds and how you got into this world. I think that might be germane. People want to know who they're hearing from.
Yeah, cool. I'm new in the segment. I'm new to retail generally. I'm on the management team at Castle. My name is John Donahue. I run corporate development. I joined Castle about a year ago. Prior to that, I built P&Ls at a marketplace business in the enterprise in a very different segment. And prior to that, I started my career in Washington, D.C., originally as an aide to Vice President Gore, and then as a lawyer in D.C., both in and out of national politics. As I said, I've been at Castle for about a year, and we are really excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Fowler. I'm the president of the Americas for Farfetch. I started my career in the luxury goods industry, mostly with LVMH, before spending some time with Cartier at Richemont, and then more recently at Tesla, and joined Farfetch 3 years ago. I have the privilege of being on the advisory board of the Baker Retailing Center since last year. So it's a great privilege to be here today and to see Jay and Mina and Tom and everyone. Actually, we're participating in Tom's marketing class as well at Farfetch. So, we love everything that you guys are doing. I'm here today, I think, to speak about this topic a little bit more broadly. So I will mostly orient my comments more broadly than just rental around the overall circular economy and sharing economy, and talk about not only rental but also resale and the opportunities that exist there. Sorry if the microphone's a bit hot. But yeah, looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Yeah, I think the segment of the market that we're talking about today, it's a spectrum, right? It goes from rental to kind of resale to selling goods on your own that you've purchased and are reselling to donation, which is a business that you guys have recently entered. I read a stat the other day, it's growing something like 21 times faster than the overall retail market, which probably speaks mostly to the current size of the segment versus its growth rate, but certainly it's growing fast. So, what's mainstream mean? How far is up, and how big can this really become as a share of wallet for the consumer? Maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. I'm going to give a lot of credit to one of my colleagues who's here today, Terrence, who's filled my head full of facts with some research he's done. But one of the statistics that jumped off the page at me was the last 15 years, consumers have purchased 60% more clothing and are disposing of it at twice the rate as they used to. And then I'm reminded also of a very funny political cartoon I saw recently. I'm sure many of you have read the book, the Marie Kondo book, the Magical Art of Tidying Up. I'm sure many of you nodding heads. It's about kind of, getting rid of things and downsizing your life and streamlining and becoming more minimalist, because who needs all this stuff? And then the cartoon was a map of the Americas as seen from space, and it was all these minimalist houses and one enormous landfill that was visible from space, which was the Kondo landfill. I think the idea of traditional retail, it's take things, make things, distribute things, and then at the end dispose of things. And it's that dispose piece that I think is so ripe for disruption. Mark has talked about it earlier, Laurent has just talked about it. These economies are booming, rental and resale and the kind of circular economy in general. Those customers aren't magically appearing out of nowhere. They're our customers. They're the same customers that previously were the buying and disposing customers, but now they just have a wider array of options. I think why I'm on this panel and why I feel Farfetch has a voice for this particular topic is we are trying to, as quickly as possible, engage with our consumers in a series of conversations about where do we need to be in order to provide them the right outlets for that type of consumption behavior. If they would like to continue to, purchase nice things and consume nice things, but they ultimately don't want to do so if it weighs on their conscience that they're just spending with no outlet. We want to be able to sort of provide them that outlet. It also helps us, by the way, and not only helps the broader economy in the world, but it provides us with different avenues to do good and do good business. So accessing goods as they come in to be able to distribute them to other consumers that might want them as a secondhand purchase. So I think it's a huge, huge upside opportunity. I would say, as the previous speakers have said, we're not just thinking about it or looking at it, we're actually doing it. And I think, similar with John, your entire business is predicated on this idea as well.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you've said. It's certainly true, as has been observed this morning, that rental, which is the business Castle's in, is in very early days in apparel. On the other hand, consumers are evolving and moving towards access models. We've seen this, of course, in music and entertainment, in transportation, in hospitality, and the modern consumer with respect to apparel is moving towards an access and experience and immersion model. Castle is a tech and logistics platform. We have built a platform upon which retail brands can launch their own subscription rental offering with their own inventory. The world need not know that we exist. Our mission is simply to enable brands to meet the modern consumer where she is. And increasingly, I think as Mark alluded to, the modern consumer wants to, in some instances, rent apparel, in other instances, own apparel, for many of the reasons that you described, but also because they're becoming habituated to the notion of accessing a consumer product in easier and broader ways. And so that's what Castle does. We've been at it for about 8 years very quietly. We launched Winnie Bee as our first owned and operated brand, in many respects to learn how to do this business, and over time built the platform that now exists upon which third parties like Scotch and Soda can run their own rental subscription program. So we are big believers in the rental model, obviously, in apparel, but it's very early days, and we're here to work with brands to think about how to exploit this consumer behavioral change towards access and immersion.
So in the mid-2000s, there was a retailer with 7,500 or 8,000 stores called Blockbuster. Mm-hmm. An upstart company called Netflix started renting DVDs through the mail. And in the early days, I can remember this because I was actually working with Blockbuster at the time, not on this program or this aspect of their business. But their response was to start a rental business of their own via the mail that was completely distinct from their own stores. There was no consumer integration to the inventory in the stores. It was just Netflix in a blue and yellow envelope instead of a red and white envelope. And we all know how that story ended. Not that maybe we'll digitize clothing and print it on 3D printers someday, but other than that aspect of the story, what lessons, and maybe this is a good one for you, what lessons should retailers, traditional brick and mortar retailers that are in the position that Blockbuster was in when Netflix entered the market, be considering as they think about their business model going forward and the implications there?
So it's a great question. So subscription rental and apparel is a digital experience now. And interestingly, the user experience for a Scotch and Soda subscriber or a Bloomingdale subscriber is actually much like the physical DVDs UX of Netflix. Mm-hmm. You actually hop on a website and you begin to flip through photos of apparel, and you prioritize the pieces of clothing you like into your digital closet. We at Castle use algorithms to maximize the amount of your prioritized clothing that arrives at your house. You wear the clothing as long as you'd like. When you're done with it, you can throw it in a bag and mail it back. If you fall in love with a piece, you can buy it. Apparel should not think about rental as a digital-only and standalone business over time. Subscription rental allows an apparel brand to monetize the entirety of its assortment in different ways. What's interesting about subscription rental is the immersion in your brand that it yields at the subscriber level. So the average subscriber to a rental offering on our platform spends about 80 to 100 minutes a month on the rental website. which is really exceptional digital engagement. She prioritizes in her closet a couple hundred pieces of clothing a year, and she wears between 80 and 100 unique pieces of your brand's clothing in a year. So she really immerses herself in that brand and assortment through digital rental subscription. And the unit economics, because you're monetizing a blouse 10 to 12 times in subscription rental versus perhaps selling it once in brick and mortar and likely at a discount, are really exceptional. That is the current state of subscription rental. We believe, and our partners on our platform believe, that subscription rental needs to be integrated into the brick and mortar experience, perhaps in ways that Blockbuster failed to do.
Right.
And we know the end of that story. We, in partnership with Express, who's been a real leader in the space, helped them to launch the first stage of in-store integration of rental into the brick and mortar footprint. And that's important as a leverage point for a couple of reasons. Perhaps the most important is that through subscription rental, you as a brand gather tons of rich and real-time data about a specific customer's fit and preference. When she returns a box to us, she's required to provide us and the brand feedback on the clothing she liked that was in her house, how it fit, what she would like to wear next. All of that data is the brand's data. And so you can imagine a world as subscription rental scales for Bloomingdale's, and they've got tens of thousands of subscribers to subscription rental. They can harvest that really rich data to create a much more meaningful experience for a consumer when she walks in the store. They'll know what she loves, what her preferences are. She'll be able to return her rental bag into the Bloomingdale store. She might be able to pick up clothing that she'd like to rent in the store, but the associate can give her a much more bespoke experience because of the data that subscription rental has harvested. And with that kind of integration, I think that brands can begin to insinuate subscription rental into their omni-channel strategy in a very complementary way to grow the business more broadly.
So perhaps just like omni-channel, I remember a software provider did an interview series in a mall where they walked around and asked consumers what omni-channel meant, and got all kinds of blank stares. They wondered if it was a hotel chain or something else. So maybe as brands have integrated their channels, and really omni-channel in its truest sense means there aren't channels. Maybe in this world, it's just another way of doing business, and the consumer doesn't really need to know that it's a different business unit or a different operating model. I don't know if you guys have across these channels.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been talking a lot recently within Farfetch, and our CEO has been talking a lot philosophically about the ways you can create value in the luxury goods industry. And fundamentally, if you look back over the course of time, there have been two primary ways that brands or retailers have created value, and it's through distribution networks and cultural relevance. Distribution networks would tell the story of probably the better part of the last 30 years, which was growth through physical retail. I think Jay could tell us probably chapters and lessons about that with Kohl's. Cultural relevance would tell you more recently examples of brands like Gucci. Without fundamentally shifting their physical retail landscape, the brand has been growing by double digits over how many years, thanks to the appointment of Alessandro, or you could look at what Virgil's done at Louis Vuitton or Off-White. Why does that matter? So if you go to the Netflix and the Blockbuster example, Netflix fundamentally beat Blockbuster by creating a better distribution strategy. They were able to distribute with the convenience of bringing it to your home, and I would argue that their algorithms, which delivered personalized recommendations, is also distribution. Why is Instagram so powerful? Because it creates markets of one. None of you who use Instagram use it not logged in, right? Because you wouldn't be having a very good time. You use it logged in. It's a personalized distribution network of content. What I think is very powerful is then to sort of take that, add it to the cultural relevance, and then look for opportunities. And I'll give you an example we've done at Farfetch. And again, broadening it out beyond rental, but here it's a way of building an economy where before maybe there wasn't one, and it's the aftermarket for products. It's interesting that some of the products that are selling for the most amount of money on Farfetch, they're not Gucci or Dior or Chanel. It's Nike. It's Adidas. It's these brands that have created things in such small quantities that there's a huge amount of interest and hype for them. But the ones who are making money there and the ones who are then sort of developing almost an increased budget to be able to go back and buy more, it's kids. It's Gen Z. I don't know what comes after Gen Z, but I guess Gen AA. if you use the XL version. They're the ones who are going out and buying it, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids buying it, bring it to a place like Stadium Goods, which is a company that Farfetch purchased, and selling it for many times multiple of what they bought it for. And I think that's sort of the cultural relevance of what the sneaker and streetwear market is teaching us about the shifting consumer behavior, and then adding that to a sort of very powerful cross-border, multinational logistics network that Farfetch has, creates that sort of really powerful combination of distribution and cultural relevance. And again, what does that mean? It means that kid now is a consumer of another brand, where before he might not have been. He's bought a sneaker for $120, sold it for $600. The most expensive item we've ever sold on Farfetch in our history is a pair of Nike sneakers. It was a sort of, I would say through our group, it was a pair of sneakers sold recently for $440,000 at auction. Wow. Sotheby's auction for a pair, one of 8 pairs. What does that say? It says that the world is shifting and how people are consuming products is shifting. That person who bought that sneaker, he's effectively renting it, right? Because he's going to keep it for a period of time and maybe sell it to someone else.
I hope so.
It's just defining rentals in a slightly different way. Certainly not going to wear it, I don't think.
Yeah. You mentioned your background in the luxury industry, so you have a lot of experience with design and the importance of design. One of you in our prep call, I don't remember which, I apologize, mentioned that the items that tend to rent more frequently are more on the fashion end of the pyramid than the basics end of the pyramid, and that makes sense. So you can take a risk as a consumer with something that's more at the fashion end of the pyramid. Does this shift in the marketplace and the rise of this new alternative marketplace economy have implications, do you think, for the designers of the world, for design as a profession, and perhaps placing even more importance on it, not just at the top and the luxury end of the spectrum, but further down in the consumer landscape?
Yeah. So in subscription rental, the fashion portion of your apparel is what performs most strongly. People are always going to buy basics, staples, but they will rent the fashions in your assortment. And that's particularly important because every piece of clothing monetizes in subscription rental. Even that piece of apparel that didn't perform well last season will monetize in subscription rental because there's no marginal cost to a consumer to wear that floral pattern. And so subscription rental yields in the neighborhood of 18 to 23% fully loaded operating margins for a brand because everything in your assortment monetizes, and most pieces of clothing are monetizing 10 to 12 times in a year, depending upon the fabrication. I think that has real implications for the industry. Number one, it enables brands, most importantly, to begin to monetize your assortment in deeper and more meaningful ways. And I think over time, it has implications for the importance of design and of design talent in the retail industry. What do brands do best? They understand who wants to wear what, and they create beautiful clothing to meet that demand. We think subscription rental lowers the barrier for a consumer to be able to explore the entirety of assortment and begin to appreciate all of the fashion and all of the talent behind the fashion in one's assortment.
Yep.
I can see it going the opposite direction as well, which I think is really interesting. We've signed a partnership with a company called Wardrobe NYC, if some of you might know this brand. And it's a really brilliantly simple concept, is that they create a seasonal wardrobe, which is, I think it's 8 pieces, men, women, and it's incredibly, straightforward, like minimalist design. So it's a hoodie, it's a t-shirt, it's a pair of pants. You go in and you buy the wardrobe once, and then you're done for the season, and then they do it again the next time. And I think that what it tells me is that this company has seen that there's a market there for someone who doesn't want to put a lot of thought, a ton of effort into what they're wearing. It's like the Steve Jobs example. Why did he always wear blue jeans and black turtlenecks? Because he just didn't have the time or the brain bandwidth to think about what he was going to wear that day, so he just put the same thing on over and over, and it just took the thought out of it. Some of those customers from Wardrobe NYC, and I know some of the customers, I know the founders, they're doing this because they want to sort of get the basics done, and then they want to have fun with some of the other sort of designs and purchases, but they don't want to think about the basics. And then they might do those things through a rental or subscription service. And that's where you take your chances, you know?
I agree entirely. And to be clear, and when we have conversations with CEOs who are considering subscription rental, we always note that subscription rental takes work. And the people who are adopting to subscription rental and apparel are people who are deeply fashion engaged, or at least somewhat fashion engaged. Again, if you spend 80 to 100 minutes a month on the Bloomingdale's My List subscription rental site, that's a lot of time. You've got to go back on a weekly basis and flip through additional photos of new arrivals and continue to closet the stuff that you like. And so in at least early days in the digital UX of subscription rental, we are attracting people who are into fashion and who love the art of engaging with clothing in a different way. And so we think that'll be the case. Those are the early adopters. As we move from digital in-store, I think you'll see adoption by a broader set of consumers. But for the time being, subscription rental, and I agree with you entirely, is really for people who are deeply fashion engaged.
One of you mentioned the fast fashion industry and culture at the beginning of the discussion. Another segment that has been the darling of the industry in some ways for the last 5-10 years has been the discount or off-price segment. What are the implications to those guys of this new alternative economy?
I think it'll play out over 3 to 5 years.
Short time.
Yeah, I think it'll move a little bit more quickly than people think, particularly as millennials and even younger consumers adopt to subscription rental. I mean, I think they've made a pretty strong statement culturally and as a generation that sustainability matters across all consumer products. And so, look, I think as the sharing economy broadly defined begins or continues to spread across apparel, you're going to see different models of consumption. And it's hard to predict with any accuracy what pressure that puts on fast fashion, but one has to imagine that it'll put some pressure on the industry and probably move the industry in a different direction.
There was an interesting instance earlier this year. A former sister company of Mark's from Hudson's Bay, Lord & Taylor, I guess you wouldn't say it's a value or a discount, certainly not, but it's also not the very, very high end, was purchased by a clothing subscription service by decode. And interesting to see, you know, for the price that they purchased it, they're taking a big bet that they can bring the world of omni-channel of physical retail, physical shopping, and online subscription services together. And I think, to your point, it's going to happen faster than we think. Here you have an example, and then I mentioned another one on our call. There is a WeWork office near our office, Farfetch. And in the mornings, as I'm passing by it and I'm getting my coffee, I observe this very interesting phenomenon. There are 2 lines to get into the WeWork. There's the one line, which is to badge in and sort of swipe your card and say, I'm a WeWork paying member and I need to get inside. And there's another line, which is to go inside the WeWork just to drop off your rental from Rent the Runway, which I thought was a brilliant tie-up between, you know, Jen's company and WeWork. And the Rent the Runway returns line is always the longer line. I mean, there are people lining up to use that service, and kind of brought, you know, in both ways, they're bringing the convenience of online rentals and subscriptions to physical places that historically, you know, might have been used for other things. The Latote Lord & Taylor example is really fascinating. I mean, I think they're sort of really blurring the lines, and that, you know, I don't know that there will necessarily be a market opportunity for the very low-end value discount retailer to introduce subscription, because at the end of the day, you do factor in the costs, you factor in the economics of it. But I definitely, I think that they now have a viable substitute, an alternative to, you know, just spending very low-end amounts, you know, to have clothing that ultimately you probably won't keep. It's not an heirloom you're purchasing at the end of the day. You're purchasing a piece of clothing.
Right. All right, well, last question for me, and then we'll go to the audience. So it's a time of year where everybody starts to make their predictions about the holiday season and what sales are going to do this fall. What are the implications of this rental market on and resale on the holiday season? I mean, first of all, will you give me permission to buy my wife a used bag for Christmas, and can we keep that in this room? Is that okay these days? I don't know. And will people give subscriptions as gifts as opposed to individual items? I mean, what's the dynamic there?
I'll take it first.
Go for it, yeah.
It's interesting. In subscription rental, at least now and recently, historically, is a gift to oneself. You give yourself a subscription to an apparel rental offering. And so in consequence, we've actually seen, in terms of subscribership, a little bit of a downturn during the holiday season as one focuses towards gifting for others as opposed to gifting for oneself. So subscription rental is seasonal, moderately seasonal in a different way. Spring and fall tend to be super high growth periods of time for the brands on our platform in terms of acquiring new consumers. That being said, we've recently launched gifting functionality for our brands. We'll move into the holiday season. It'll be really interesting to see whether and to what extent people begin to gift subscription rental. And if that comes to pass, then I think that's another important benchmark for the consumer adoption of subscription rental. If you start thinking about giving, your sister or your mom or your brother a gift to a subscription rental offering in apparel, that's an interesting endorsement of the model. And as we move into other categories like maternity, which we will do in relatively short order, that is where we would see gifting, I think, manifest itself in different ways. So, the holiday period historically has been a little slow for us, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking about the holidays, I'm thinking one thing we've done over the last years at Farfetch every year is, which is very meaningful for our teams, is we gather donations for families in need. And we've just done this recently with Jessica Seinfeld's charity Good Plus. We got a bunch of unused samples, and it's all brand new things. It's not, worn things, gather them for donations. And just recently we announced in London a pilot program where we're partnering with a donation service called Thrift Plus, where people can put together into a brown bag that's co-branded Thrift Plus and Farfetch any clothing that they don't want anymore. And we have a way of valuing the donations that they're giving, and we're giving them credit on Farfetch for that. So a small thing, I think we're trying to do some good. And again, you mentioned we got into donations, so I just wanted to sort of explain the reference of, extending the life of things. Just because you don't need it anymore, you don't want it, it's gone out of favor for you. That thing can be incredibly valuable for someone else who does need it or doesn't have the same resources. And then to help encourage that behavior, we just, give them a little credit on our side to be able to sort of encourage them to have an incentive for that. For the holiday season, as I think about subscriptions, if I've been gifted subscriptions in the past and I didn't get there myself, it wasn't me making that decision. More often than not, I've usually used it and maybe let it lapse, but very rarely does somebody give me a subscription. I'm like, where has this been my whole life?
Wine of the Month Club.
Exactly, Coffee of the Month Club or whatever. And I just realized at one point it's sort of burdensome to me. But I definitely think if I were building the algorithm for a subscriptions-based business, I'd be really thinking about the product market fit, but that market would be the end consumer, not the gifting kind of model. I just feel like it's going to be inherently a little bit less sticky. And then to your point, should you be thinking about buying your wife? I have to make mention of it as well because it's one of the other ways we're getting into the resale market and experimenting. We have a startup incubator at Farfetch called Dream Assembly. It's based in Lisbon, Portugal, and we invite cohorts of 10 startups to come, and we give them a small seed investment, and we just sort of nourish a lot of their thinking over the course of 12 weeks. We introduce them to brand partners. We get them thinking about their product market fit. And we tend to focus mainly on sustainable businesses that have sustainability at their core. And with one of these businesses, we've launched a pilot called Second Life, where customers can send photos and descriptive information about handbags, or it's handbags-based pilot. So it could be handbags from Chanel, Dior, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, et cetera. Brands that traditionally don't tend to sell outside of their own channels for the most part. And those brands, in particular, like Hermes Birkin, Hermes Kelly's, these are incredibly, incredibly sought after products that have waiting lists and people wanting to get them. So we will value those products. We'll give them usually a small incentive if it's a very high demand product. And we'll give them, importantly, instant credit for the product if they do decide to give that product to us. We work with this third-party retailer because we then don't resell those products on Farfetch. This company has its own channel that they take the product into, and it's in a different market. But that gives them that instantaneous gratification for giving their product away, extending its life, and then sort of re-entering the market back at the point of consumption. So if you hadn't thought about it already, that's a good idea for your wife for the holidays.
Great. It's always a panic time time of year for me, so I need those ideas. Okay, should we shift to the audience and see if there's any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing, John, if your partners are finding more success in the subscription rental business, bringing new customers to the brand versus expanding share of wallet with existing customers.
Yep. It's a great question. So across, we call our clients tenants on our platform, which range from Ann Taylor, Loft, American Eagle, Scotch and Soda, Bloomingdale's, Vince, Rebecca Taylor. So from mall to department store to contemporary. Across all of those tenants, half of the subscribers on our platform are new to the tenants file. The other half are incumbent customers. The good news there, and this was the really important threshold question that we had to answer, which was cannibalization. If you launch subscription rental, will your customer end up simply subscribing versus continuing to buy? Among the incumbent customers, wallet share increases by about 125% in the year after she subscribes to subscription rental. And we believe that's the case because, again, she immerses herself deeply in the brand. She's wearing 80 to 100 pieces of clothing of yours per annum through subscription rental. And in consequence, she ends up buying more clothing across all channels, including brick and mortar and e-com. Our contemporary brands tell a different story. So the Vinces, the Rebecca Taylors of the world. In that category, it looks like about 80% of the customers are new to file and younger than the brand's incumbent customers. So you're seeing the aspirational story that I think Mark alluded to, which is rental subscription for a Vince or a Rebecca Taylor, other contemporary brands that we're going to launch, is a great way for younger women in particular who aspire to the brand to begin to experiment with the brand and immerse themselves in the brand and hopefully over time become very loyal customers and who yield a really attractive lifetime value for Vince over an extended period of time.
Hi, my question is around the product assortments between the main brands and the rental channels. So as you've been reading through all of the analytics around the rental customer, has it led to conversations around having differentiated assortments or exclusive development, particularly for rental?
We encourage our brands to launch into subscription rental much of their assortment. Not all of their assortment, but much of their assortment, and particularly basics, staples. You can sprinkle that in, but again, a rational customer is going to buy a black t-shirt. She's not going to rent a black t-shirt. But nevertheless, our brands are introducing into subscription rental most of their assortment. They're beginning to gather as their subscribership scales, and this is why we've discussed this. Scale matters in subscription businesses. You have to get to a meaningful subscriber count to actually yield all of the benefits of a subscription business. In apparel, that means scale means data. You're going to get a lot of preference and fit data from your consumers about what she likes, what she doesn't like, what she wants. Our brands will begin to invest in design into that data. We're in early days of that transition, but it will happen. And it's a great way to maximize the monetary value of the clothing that you're creating. And we, look, we're a technology company at the end of the day. We have world-class data scientists out in our office in the Valley. Their job is to create algorithms that are designed explicitly to maximize the yield of your inventory with the objective of maximizing subscriber retention, which yields the economics. And over time, that'll, I think, involve itself in the actual design of the assortment.
Do we have time for one more, or should we? One more, okay.
Hi. Sorry, thanks. Just was hoping you could talk a little bit about the geographic reach of the rental business as we think about it going mainstream. Curious if you're seeing better traction in major cities and areas where maybe pickup and delivery is a little bit easier, and if not, what needs to happen on the logistics side for this to ultimately become something that can work across the country and in smaller markets?
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as
Yeah.
well. Very quickly, our subscribership matches to the population index in the US. We're only in the US now. We'll move into Europe at some point. We have 2 distribution centers, one in Ohio, one out in Phoenix, so we can mail through the Postal Service your stuff to you within 2 days. But our subscribership matches to the population index. We're mostly in women's, happily, thanks to Ari's leadership at Scott & Soda, we're now in men's. Our subscribers are 28 to 45, working women in particular, who match to the population index, but I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I actually don't think that there's a huge discrepancy between where consumers live and what you see in terms of penetration. I mean, obviously, most of our businesses in the luxury sector would be heavily dependent on the top sort of 5 to 10 cities in the world. But certainly one of the advantages of like a very, very robust distribution network is the ability to reach hard to reach places. And I was talking earlier with the gentleman at my table about the last mile. I think the ones that can even solve for the last mile will have a decided advantage there. When we rolled out Farfetch in the Middle East, we did so through a partnership with Shalhoub Group. We did that importantly because shopping in the Middle East, and part of the reason online shopping in the Middle East is super low penetrated, it's at 1% of the luxury sector. 1% of the Middle East spend is online, 99% offline. It's for very basic reasons that, number one, there are no street addresses. A house is the 4th house on the left past the fountain after you've seen the palm tree. Literally, if you look at Google Maps, you zoom in on a city like Dubai, you will notice a very eerie absence of street names and addresses. So you need last mile to be able to sort of close the gap for online. The other one is payment forms. It's mostly women doing the purchasing, but very few women have access to credit cards or debit cards. So it's cash on delivery. Again, all the more reason why you need to localize an online shopping experience, because who buys online and pays cash? You need to solve for that. So if you then have a compelling offer, and it's a subscription offer, or it's a rental, or it's anything that's delivered, and you're able to solve for the inherent intricacies of global logistics and distribution, you'll end up finding that human behavior is almost the same, broadly speaking, the world over when it comes to consumption. We all want creature comforts. We all want things that make us look and feel good. And if you can kind of solve for those challenges, those distribution challenges, you'll have a customer there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, John, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, John.